Please welcome back to the stage Nicholas Logothetis, along with Ian Bremmer, founder and president of the Eurasia Group, and Chris Christie, former governor of New Jersey.
Did you miss me? I guess not. All right. Thank you, Governor Christie.
Thank you.
Ian, I've never met you, Governor, before, but I know Ian very well, and Ian's on our leadership council, and so we're thrilled to be here. I want to make this more of a conversation, so please interrupt me.
That's easy.
You know, tell me to stop, whatever. There's a lot to go through. I want to obviously go through some current political and diplomatic events. I guess my first question for you, as we sort of are here today at the UNGA, is what is the difference between how the United States is viewed today around the world versus how it was viewed on November 7th, 2016?
Well, I mean, significantly different in my view, because you have a president now who has completely personalized foreign policy. He believes that if he gets into any room with any person in the world, that he can convince them of his point of view, regardless of what the history is, regardless of what some current circumstances are, regardless of what he may have said in the past. And this is, I think, very different than any foreign policy we've had in the past, to say the least, but also it helps to disorient some folks. And so it makes it a lot more difficult. It's a very, very personalized approach from someone who has never been involved in this process before in foreign affairs or politically in general. It's made the world a very, very different place.
I mean, relations with American traditional allies, obviously much more strained given the unilateralism of Trump on the Paris Climate Accord, on Trans-Pacific Partnership, on the Iranian nuclear deal, Though when it's one-on-one, they kiss a lot of Trump butt. And we saw that at the G7 summit recently, because the US is a much bigger actor and they don't want to offend the guy, and they're finding ways to work around him. But I'll say one interesting thing. This weekend, Trump and Modi on stage in Texas.
Howdy, Modi.
50,000 chanting very happy Indians. A US relationship with India today, and Trump's with Modi, is better than it was under Obama. US relationship with Xi Jinping is worse than it was under Obama. If it were the other way around, I think people would be complaining a lot about that.
So it's literally based upon the relationship that whichever world leader has with the president.
No question. I mean, listen, this is the way he views the world. He views the world as, how do you relate to him? And how you relate to him, he extrapolates more broadly into how is it that you relate to the United States as a world leader. And so folks have to understand that that's the way it's going to be. I think you're right. And I think when you look at the G7, you've seen them beginning to adjust, both in ways that I think are good and not so good for our future alliances, to the idea that they have to deal with Donald Trump in a much more personal way than they would with President Obama or President Bush 43, for certain.
Yeah. Let's talk about China for a second. I think it's widely understood that the Chinese have been playing an unfair game, generally speaking, in terms of trade, in terms of IP theft, and all the issues that we all know about. Do you think that the way the president's going about it, which would sort of fit with what you're saying, a personal negotiation, almost as if he's doing a deal, a real estate deal essentially, is going to produce a better deal than a staid, technocratic, joint Chinese, the way any other president would do it essentially?
Well, listen, it hasn't worked before, the way we were doing it.
Yeah.
And this is one of those areas where this is something that Donald Trump's been consistent about. One of the only things he's been consistent about in his entire public life has been this unfair trade relationship between the United States and other countries. For a while, in the 80s, it was Japan, and now it's turned into China. But this is something that he absolutely core believes. Many other things, he's been all over the map in terms of his public pronouncements throughout his public life on different issues. This one has been very consistent. And so I don't think anybody should be surprised at the approach he's taking. I do think the Chinese have needed to be taught told plainly by American leadership that the IP theft and the other trade issues are very, very important issues to us economically going forward, and that as China has developed and grown, they now need to act a little bit differently than they've acted in the past as a player in the world stage.
Yeah. Ian, I mean, what do you think about the chances for a deal, which is, you're a counselor to many business leaders around the world, and certainly in my business experience, it's the question everyone is asking every single day. And so.
Well, look, Chris is right that this is an issue that Trump has been consistent on. For a long time, which is not always the case with a lot of issues. Yeah. It's also one that right now there's bipartisan consensus on. If you ask me around the world in foreign policy, where do you get Democrats and Republicans agreeing, it's that we need to take a tougher line against China for many of the issues that the governor just surfaced. But I don't think we're going to get a deal. And in part, it's because Trump by himself, using his personal weight, the weight of the United States, can force the Mexicans, the Canadians, Europeans, Japanese, South Koreans over the line. Can't do that as easily with the Chinese. And I think the Chinese are now looking ahead to 2021. I think they're saying we can take the tariff hits. We don't think he's going to want to do much more because it's going to affect the American economy. We've already seen how anemic the last bluster of new tariffs actually was. And they're working, the single lesson they've taken away from Trump in the last year is we're going to do everything possible to build our own supply chain, secure our own semiconductors from places like Taiwan and South Korea. And long term, that is not good for the United States. We are heading to fragment and unwind the global technology base into two, one of which will be led by Beijing.
Yeah, and I think one of the political issues, as you alluded to, is that the Chinese probably at this point feel like they can wait it out until the election in 2020 and see if they get someone they consider to be better for them than Trump. Now, that's completely contrary to what the president would like to see, which is to get a deal between now and 2020 for what he would consider to be the positive market effects that a deal would get him. But I got a feeling if you're dealing with the Chinese, the price is just going higher and higher now as you get closer and closer to November of 2020, and a price that the president just may not be willing or able to pay. So I think we may have gone past the window to be able to get a deal. You never quite know in these things, but that's my view of it.
It's getting harder. You got Hong Kong, which is making them definitely wanting to show themselves as being stronger on these issues. They have red lines on Huawei in terms of the release of the daughter of the founder, which is an independent judiciary show, not one that Trump can take care of himself. I just don't think you can get there.
So yeah, and you, Governor, you don't think the president would take a sort of bad to medium deal just to get it done? I mean,
well, I think listen, after what he said about this, I think it would be very difficult for him to do that. Now, we know the president is, one of the best marketers we've ever had in the Oval Office, and so he's going to if he were to make a deal, he would market it as
the best deal
as the greatest deal that was ever done by any president at any time, beating out the Louisiana Purchase by a mile. We know what he would say. The question is, under scrutiny, remember, this is where, and this is often not said about this president, but on this one I think it's true, this is where his principles will get in the way, because he really does believe that he's the person who's been talking about this for 30 years, and that he's the one who's going to have to deliver a tougher deal with China.
But he is prepared to throw in Greenland to sweeten the pot.
Well, right? That's part of the deal. It's like baseball. It's like three-way trades.
Exactly,
you try to get those three-way trades to make it a little easier.
But I mean, the reality is, and then we'll move on, is any time you even literally, it's hilarious on Twitter if there's a report like, U.S. and Chinese trade negotiators had a phone call. It's like the Dow goes up 100 points.
But let's be clear. Let's be clear. So far, actual impact on the U.S. economy is 1% of GDP. On China, it's 0.1%. On China, it's 0.5%. 0.5%. On the Iran deal, right? So far, everyone's complaining. They hit the Saudis Everyone's complaining they took down a drone. The reality is we are destroying the Iranian economy. Right. It's in a massive recession, almost 10% contraction this year. So you have to look at reality too, and the U.S. is actually causing a lot of damage.
Yeah, and listen, and this is, the president was really clear about this stuff during the campaign. I was on the stage during a good part of that, and I could tell you that he was very clear about what he was going to do with Iran. He was very clear about what he was going to do with China. He's doing it, and it is having, in some measure, the effects that he wanted it to have. And so, fact is that there's a lot of drama around this, as there's a lot of drama with everything that comes out of his mouth and the way the media covers it. But I think Ian's right. When you look at the reality of what's going on here, the reason the Iranians have done what they've done, in my view, is because they are hurting. And what he's done with them on the sanctions is really hurting them. He's trying to make that the way to get them to move into something that he considers to be more reasonable and acceptable regarding their nuclear program.
So yeah, switching to Iran. I mean, I know neither of you in their government are in the government at the moment, but it's widely assumed that they were the ones that struck the Aramco facilities in Saudi Arabia. And they did it somehow blaming the Yemenis, or getting the Yemenis to say we did it. And do you think, what do you think the reaction of the United States is going to be to that? Knowing that President Trump really, and truly does not want to engage in any military action?
Again, it's interesting. Everyone is saying, how are the Americans going to respond, as if we need to escalate? When the reality is that the Iranians are the ones responding, right? We're the ones that pulled out of the nuclear deal. We're the ones that have hit them with very hard sanctions. We're the ones that also forced our allies and even the Chinese to back away from what they were buying. The Iranians increasingly can't export oil, and they're saying if we can't get oil out, then nobody can. So they're the ones that are reacting. What's the logic that says the Americans have to hit as a consequence of it? Every other country in the world sees the Americans as the aggressor here, rightly or wrongly, and I think the Iranians are on the back foot. The fact that you have some people like Lindsey Graham and John Bolton, boo-hoo, saying, damn, why can't I be in power now so that I could launch against these guys, doesn't mean that's what the American president should be. By the way, Secretary Mattis, not there anymore, but absolutely privately is saying right now, no, we should not be engaging militarily. I trust those guys a lot more.
Listen, the potential on a reaction here by us is the unknown. We don't know how we're going to escalate and potentially harm the region in a way that makes it even larger. And I think, again, you go back to what the president talked about during the campaign and through most of his administration. He does not want to get into another war in the Middle East. Yeah. He's made that very clear. And so he's doing things that he believes are effective. And I think, as we've discussed up here already, the sanctions against Iran are obviously effective, or Iran would not be reacting in the way they're reacting and taking the risk in the region that they're taking. And so I don't know that the president needs to do a whole lot more than what he's done so far. Let's see how this continues to play out. And I don't necessarily think that it's our obligation to militarily react to the attack that the Iranians did to the Saudis.
Yeah. And I think
and he's trying to, by the way, he's also trying to get the Saudis to do some of their own work. By selling them more arms and modernizing their military capability. He's saying to them, we're right behind you, go get them. And if they want to do it, he views it, I think, as their business.
Sort of switching over to some domestic matters. You ran for president. What do you think about the sort of current crop of Democrats, and it's impossible to predict, but in terms of today, right now, how do you view the race, and in your opinion, as a political sort of strategist and someone who's gone through it, who has the best chance of beating President Trump?
Well, don't ever forget that when you're running for president, we were talking about this backstage, money is everything. It just is. If you don't have the money to organize, if you don't have the money to advertise, if you don't have the money to hire staff, you simply cannot progress beyond the early stages. And so what do you see now in that? You see basically four candidates right now who are viable. Warren, Sanders, Biden, Buttigieg. Why? Why is the mayor of South Bend viable at the moment? Because he raised $24 million last quarter. That's why. And he's viable until the money runs out. Why are the others having trouble? Well, there's a variety of reasons in my view, but at core, they're not raising the money to be able to push their message out, organize in these early states, and make an impact. So at this point, those four, I think, are the most viable. I don't know. We're going to have to see whether one of the others can, whether it's Harris or Booker or any of the others, can move their way up into that grouping. But I think you're going to see this narrow down significantly come the fall. Right now, I think it is, the polls I think are right. I think it is a Warren-Biden, moderate Democrat, way progressive Democrat battle. I think Sanders is done. No one's told him yet. Because if they do, he'll scream at them like, revolution, so like.
I wrote the damn bill.
Yeah, right. I mean, so Bernie's angry. I understand why he's angry. He says, I started this whole thing. Now they're going to give it to somebody else? That's the frustration of presidential politics. So right now, I think it's Warren and Biden, and I think that there's room for a third viable contender. That may happen, it may not, but I think one of the nominee is one of those two people.
If it is Elizabeth Warren, do you think she has a chance to beat Donald Trump?
I think this race will be close no matter what. I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how she deals, if she winds up being the nominee, with Donald Trump on the stage. And I mean that only from what style will she select. Not whether she can or she can't. She's an experienced politician. She's good at what she does. It's not like she's going to be up there and be intimidated. She's not going to be intimidated. But it doesn't mean you're going to pick the right strategy on how to deal with him. And he is a very different character to attempt to deal with in that atmosphere. Where Biden, I think, will just be Biden if it's him. Now, that can be good and it can be bad, as we've seen. But he has 50 plus years of doing this where he's going to be who he is. And the American people are going to watch that contrast and see which one they prefer for this moment. Where Warren, I think, she's going to have to pick who she wants to be. Is she Harvard Elizabeth Warren? Or is she the childhood Elizabeth Warren? When she talks about her upbringing and her background, she connects with people. When she starts talking about, her regulatory background and her time at Harvard, I got to tell you, not to offend any of the people out here who may have gone to Harvard, but I don't think America's pining for a Harvard law professor right now and saying, if we only had another Harvard law professor, our entire country would be better off. So I think she's got to make some judgments about how she deals with it.
I mean, it's fun to see double standards. I mean, there's been so many questions recently about, sort of Biden's age and his mental coherence, about corruption around his family. I mean, I'm starting to think maybe he can win the presidency.
Yeah, right.
I don't think he's going to get the nomination. I think what's happening in the United States is what's happening in Canada and in Germany and in Italy and in the UK and Australia. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of disenfranchisement, and it's causing polarization to the left and to the right. So, I agree with everything you just said. I think that Warren right now looks a hell of a lot more plausible to me than Biden. The question I have is how many of those angry men in the United States who say they're going to vote for one way actually prepared to vote for an educated woman? And we'll see. I mean, I'd love to say that the country is ready for that, but it's not at all clear to me.
And there's a report this morning of a focus group in Wisconsin of women who switched from Obama to Trump in 2016, and those who switched from Romney to Hillary Clinton from 2012 to 2016. And they said that when they just blindly gave Elizabeth Warren's positions, they were generally supportive. But then when they showed Elizabeth Warren talking about those positions, they flipped. That's what I'm talking about, is her problem.
That's a problem.
Listen, just remember this about American politics in the last nearly 60 years. Except for 1968, I would argue to you that the more likable candidate won for president every time.
How did you rank on likability?
How did I rank on likability?
Yeah.
Beautifully.
Yeah?
Yeah. The more likable candidate always wins when it gets down to the two.
Yeah.
They always win. They always win. And so don't forget that, because the people who decide these elections are always the people in the middle. And the people in the middle are not, because they're in the middle, they're not ideologically drawn to one or the other. They look and they say, all right, I like him better. I'll vote for him. I would say one quick anecdote. 2000 campaign, Al Gore and George Bush. Every reason why Al Gore should win that race. given where we were in the world at the time, economically, foreign policy. Remember the town hall debate between Al Gore and George W. Bush. Al Gore inexplicably gets up in the middle of it while Bush is speaking, gets right in Bush's space. And what did Bush do? Bush turned around and went, "How you doing?" And then kept talking. Yeah. I turned to my wife and I said, "It's over." So what do you mean it's over? I said, anybody who's undecided goes, Gore's weird, Bush is normal, I vote for the normal guy. Mm-hmm. Because if you're in a bar and someone comes up in your space when you're having a conversation, that's what you do, right? You go like, "How you doing?" And you go, "Please go away," right? Yeah. And that's what Bush did. Don't forget that Americans are still picking someone that they like more. And I think that's going to be the challenge for Warren, because they've already kind of made up their minds on Trump one way or the other. Yep.
Sadly, we're out of time, but I think this was great, and hopefully we can continue it in years to come. So thank you very much.
Yep. Excellent.